Well, here we go, basic factoring. Now, hopefully we'll be doing this in person because it's a little easier, but we'll give this a shot in this remote method. We're trying to find a pair of numbers. Now, this is just a mental exercise. This is not the actual factoring, but this is a mental exercise to get you ready for factoring, for basic factoring. We'll talk about other types of factoring later. Pair of numbers that multiply to 7. Now we're talking integers, two integers that multiply to 7, but those same numbers add to 8. Now there's only one pair of numbers that multiply to 7 when we're talking integers, where both of them are positive, 1 and 7. So 1 and 7 add to 8. So 1 and 7, there's your pair. Now let's look at another setup. Multiply to 32, add to 18. Now sometimes it's easy to come up with a pair like 1 and 7. And by the way, 1 and the number is sometimes the pair we forget. But multiplying to 32, add to 18. Don't try to figure out the add part. Start with the multiply part, much easier. 1 and 32. List all the pairs to help you visually look at it. 2 and 16. 4 and 8. There's the pairs that multiply to 32. And if we look at these pairs, which of those adds to 18? 2 and 16. So 2 and 16 are my pair that multiply to 32 and add to 18. Now try to do the rest of the worksheet of practice problems dealing with these pairs for this part. Now the next thing we're going to talk about is basic factoring, where you actually have a trinomial and you're going to factor it into two binomials. Now, the first step in this process that I usually go through is I start with making sure it's in descending order. Now, we usually have a chart on the side of the room and it'll be on the piece of paper that I give you. And that chart basically says, if I were to recreate it, this is a horrible drawing, but you'll get what I mean. If the first sign second sign, I don't have enough room here, and answer sign, signs. All right. So you'll see this on the bottom of your worksheet. If the first sign is plus, like this is your first sign, it's the one between the two terms, and the second sign is plus, then your answers in your factoring are going to be plus and plus. If your first sign is minus and your second sign is plus, your answer signs will be minus, minus. First sign is plus, second is minus. You'll have one of each. It doesn't matter which one comes first. Typically we do plus, minus, but it could be minus, plus. And then if your first sign was minus and your second sign was minus, you're also going to have one of each, a plus and a minus. Whichever one comes first is up to you. So, when I'm working with this, the first thing I do is put down two sets of parentheses like so. The next thing I do is, since x squared is listed as my first term, I usually put the variable in the first spot of each parenthesis, like so. Then I use my sign chart and help me figure out which signs I should be putting in. In this case, plus and plus give me a plus and a plus, so plus, plus. Now in the previous slide, earlier in this video, you saw us do some practice with coming up with pairs of numbers that multiply and add to a certain value. Well, the add, You want a pair of numbers that add to 14, multiply. Helps if I can spell. There we go. To 40. Okay, we're looking for a pair of numbers that add to 14 and multiply to 40. Well, if you think about it, multiply to 40, add to 14, how about 10 and 4? Or I could have put the 4 first and then the 10. Doesn't really matter because they're both a plus. And there's factoring. Now, if you wanted to check to make sure you factored it correctly, this is done. That's your answer. But if you're going to check it, you could distribute it out like we did earlier. X squared plus 4x plus 10x plus 40. And the like terms add to 14x and multiply to 40. And that's where the add and the multiply part comes from. So give those problems a try on the worksheet and then see how you do on them. Here's the next part that we're going to look at. Now this is back to that mental exercise first and then the factoring second. So the mental exercise, pairs of numbers that multiply to 7 add to, negative 8 here. All right, I've got a negative in there. Well, if we have two numbers that multiply to a positive, there's two ways that can happen. One is you can have two positives. We're talking two numbers. The other is two negatives. If they're going to add to a negative, you must have two negatives because you can't have two positives add to a negative. So a pair of numbers that multiply to 7 where both are negative and they add to negative 8, negative 1, negative 7. Multiply to positive 7, add to negative 8. Remember that sign chart we just looked at? That's going to help us remember this as well. And now you're going to practice those. Then we're going to work on factoring these. So in this one, we're adding and multiply. Okay, again, same idea. You're going to have two sets of parentheses, x in the first spot of each because that's my variable. It could have been y or w, doesn't really matter. My sign chart, because minus first then plus, is a minus minus. Remember, both have to be negative when you add to a negative and multiply to a positive. Okay, so pairs of numbers that multiply to 40 add to negative 14. Negative 4, negative 10. 4 times 10 is 40. 4 plus 10, when the signs are the same, they add to your number, negative 14x. Again, I could distribute it back out just to prove it to myself, but that is my answer. Go ahead and try some of these other problems. Next, we're going to work on what happens when it multiplies to a negative. Okay. In this case, if it multiplies to a negative, when you make your list of numbers, don't throw the negatives in. Only throw the negatives into your answer. Just make a pair of numbers that multiply to 45. What multiplies to 45? 1 and 45, 5, whoops, and let's see, I meant to do 5 later. Let's do 3 first, and 15, 5, and 9. Now, when you're thinking about this, if you have two numbers and they multiply to a negative, one of them has to be negative and the other one has to be positive. That's the only way you get a negative number when you're multiplying two numbers. So if one of these is negative and one's positive, when I combine them together, what kind of answer do I need to get? I need to get a positive 4. Well, when I'm adding a positive and a negative, really, when you think about it, if I add a positive number and a negative number, I'm really subtracting the two numbers by keeping the sign of the negative number, sign of the larger, quote unquote, larger valued number, and subtracting the two. All right, so if that's the case, which of these differs by 4? Well, 5 and 9 differs by 4. So 5 and 9 are my two numbers. Which one needs to be negative so that when I combine them, I get a positive 4? Well, it's got to be, the 5 has to be negative in this case. Now, if this had been a negative 4, it'd have been the 9 that would have to be negative instead. All right, so there is the way you're going to work with these. Go ahead and see if you can try some of these and see how they work out for you. Once you're done that and checked them, here is the next thing we're going to work with, which is factoring this pair. Again, add and multiply, right? A pair of numbers, oh darn. I don't think that's the one I wanted, because that's going to give me, oh no, that is exact, no, that's not what I wanted. That should be a minus 10, not a plus 10. That makes a difference. Let's fix that. All right, that's much better for what I was looking for. A pair of numbers. Now, we're going to do two sets of parentheses again. We'll throw our variables in. Now, when we look at our signs, we have a minus and a minus. That table tells me I should have a plus sign and a minus sign. And I need pairs of numbers that multiply to 10, 1 and 10, 2 and 5. And I have different signs, so those numbers have to differ by 3. Well, the only pair that differs by 3 is 2 and 5. Now I have to put them so that I get a negative 3. So I want my 5 to be negative, so 5 is going to be with the negative and the 2 with the positive. Positive 2 and negative 5 give me negative 3, and when I multiply I get negative 10, and there you have it. So just to be sure we don't have anything else, that's it for today.